trying to figure out ultimately what is he.
It's still a mystery as to why it took them. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Primetime Crime. As you can see, it is not live tonight. There's a couple things going on, so we didn't want to take away from that. Our friend Susan Hendricks is doing an awesome live at Delphi. She's literally been at the trial, and she's going live with CrimeCon tonight, so we wanted to catch that. But we wanted to do a show. So if you follow me personally, you will know I am all over the Menendez Brothers case. I am fascinated by this. And I think there's been some confusion around what's going on, especially if you haven't been paying attention. So we thought together, clearly with Jared's help, who is a seasoned attorney, we could break down what's going on and, without giving too much of our opinion. Most of you know my opinion by now, but this is facts, essentially. So Jared, how are you?
I'm good, but I'm giving my opinion anyway.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I guess I meant, I don't know. It's so, this case is so divisive. You got the older generation who's like, they blew their parents' brains out, excuse my language. And then you've got the younger generation, a lot of us who are like, well, this is what happened to them. This is not right. However, but we'll get there. So just quickly going back, we're not going to go all the way back and give this crazy detailed recap, but I do want to go back and just refresh everyone's memory that Eric and Lyall Menendez, their first trial, it was a hung jury. Their defense was imperfect self-defense. They were molested by their father, I should say raped by their father, while their mother was well aware. She allowed it. She abused them in different ways. One could argue that the murder was premeditated. They did buy the guns, but this essentially, the murder was prompted really by Eric being told that he was not allowed to go to UCLA and actually live on campus. Eric was really depending on this to get away from his father. And when his father told him that wouldn't be happening, Eric just simply wanted to die. So first trial was hung. We saw witnesses like Dr. Ann Burgess, Dr. Vickery, who really, in my opinion, if you go back and watch the court TV footage, they were one of the strongest witnesses that could really, and aside from the family members that corroborated that the brothers had told them what was going on, they really gave us, I guess, an in-depth look at what happens to abuse victims. So I would recommend, if anybody is not familiar with that testimony that they gave, that you should go back and watch that. Now, the jury was hung. I did interview a juror, Hazel Thornton, and she told me that it was the women who really wanted manslaughter, and it was the men that wanted murder one. The women didn't even think that the prosecution presented a case that could warrant murder two, which I thought was very interesting. So the second trial, as many of you know, was the same judge, Judge Stanley Weisberg, and what was going on in LA during this time was a little crazy. There were the 4 cops that were, they were essentially let off for beating the shit out of Rodney King. There was all those riots, and then OJ got off, and yeah, the DA's office looked terrible.
8 days before trial number 2.
Oh, thank you. OJ was acquitted days before, and you can go back and hear Leslie Abramson say, "Oh my God, this is really bad for the boys." And so Weisberg did not allow their defense in, and he didn't allow basically all of the family members to testify. He didn't allow the doctors. And because of this conversation Lyall had with a woman who duped him, and it wouldn't paint him in the best light, they decided not to have Lyall testify because of the cross. So all of these factors. Oh, and then this was huge for me. I didn't know this until a few weeks ago, Jarrett. The jury slip in the second trial, it said murder or not guilty. So you've got a hung jury that took over a month in deliberations for the first trial. And then you've got the second trial where it took them under an hour, because let's remind everyone, Jarrett, the question was never, did they do it? It was, why they did it. So, and something else I always thought was insane is that they were facing death. So during the penalty phase, for this judge to not allow these doctors in and their testimony in and these, like, their lives are on the line. I mean, when there's a death case, they'll fly in somebody's kindergarten teacher to talk.
I've had it happen. So
yeah, right.
I think a couple of major differences between trial 1 and trial 2. It is rare. First of all, there were 2 juries. Each defendant had their own jury in trial 1.
Yes.
There was 1 jury in trial 2. It's rare that you would see a judge overrule themselves on a ruling like sexual abuse and things of that nature. It almost becomes like there's a term of art called the law of the case. So when you go in for round 2, you would say, Judge, we've already addressed this in round 1. This is in or this is out. Now, if you look at the Weinstein case or the Cosby case, there was a lot of back and forth. Cosby 1 hangs. I was there the day that jury hung. And Cosby case 2, where the other victim allowed to testify in support of Andrea Consted's testimony, he was convicted. So it's same thing with Weinstein, where you have this, we call it here in Pennsylvania, and I think it's the federal rule 404B, prior bad act type evidence. In the Menendez case, despite the fact that you had these psychiatrists and these treating physicians who knew the boys, worked with Lyall and Eric, you didn't have a cultural understanding of boys being raped. I think that has changed. You did not have the level of understanding, or maybe you did, the law hadn't caught up with it, of how abuse victims may act or react to years and years of abuse. So you say that this stuff wasn't, beside the fact that it wasn't presented in the guilt phase, they're on trial literally for their lives. And when you're in that penalty phase, everything comes in. I had a guy, I've done penalty cases, I've gotten the conviction and then go on to that penalty phase. I had a 3rd grade teacher come in and talk about the fact that he had to buy my defendant a Halloween costume, and just going into the life that he was living as a young man. There's a catch-all provision of mitigation evidence in penalty phases. And that catch-all provision is any and all evidence that would aid the jury or fact finder in assessing mitigating evidence, which means like everything can come in. You can get, as a prosecutor, do I think some of that stuff is maybe BS, or do I think it's immaterial? Yeah, but at the same time, I recognize that this person's life is on the line. I want to make sure that if ultimately death is imposed, it stands the rigors of appeal. So I'm more of the opinion, let it in, I'll do it. So those are the things that really were the judges in this case were wrestling with, and the appeal courts have wrestled with.
I think you bring up great points. I just think that let's say you're in the camp where you don't believe the brothers. You don't believe they were molested. You don't believe they were raped. I think that people should identify and acknowledge that they did not get a fair second trial. And if that was you, how would you feel? Right? How would you feel if they had all the money in the world at this time and they couldn't get a fair trial? That's bullshit. Excuse my language. So do you agree with that? Let's say put everything else aside.
Whether or not you believe Lyall and Eric Menendez, let's assume you don't believe them, right?
Right.
The next question is, as a prosecutor, I'm asking myself, but is a jury likely to believe them? And if that gets in, would a jury believe it? And what does that do to my case? If I recognize that that's a possibility, I may go to them and say, there are things that have come up in cases where I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball and could say what a jury's going to do, but I recognize it's a path they could take. Then it's high time to maybe make a deal. So I have always said, had the hung jury in the first, the fact that this stuff was kept out is going to haunt this case for eternity. And it has. So I look at this now, the one thing I'm grateful for, and you might think it's weird for a prosecutor to say this, I'm grateful for the fact that we don't convict people and lock them up and throw away the key. We continue to review their cases. And if you are honorable in what you're doing, if you believe in the system, then your case should stand up. If the law changes, there are good reasons why your case should change. And looking at this case now, basically what's going on is the district attorney has.
Well, wait, hold on. We have to go back because there's still some gaps we need to fill in. Because yeah, there's still a few gaps, but you didn't quite, I guess, convey. Do you think, and again, I want to be clear to everybody, you are a prosecutor. You're not a defense attorney. Do you think they got a fair second trial?
No, I think this should have been it.
Okay. And you said
I absolutely think it should have been it.
Yeah. And so you said this about Delphi as well, not to bring in other things, but you're like, if that's me and I'm trying this case, let in his defense of Odinism because you don't want anything that they could appeal, right? You don't want anything. And a side note is Eric and Lyall, Jarrett, they exhausted all appeals back in 2005. That was it for them. So it's interesting that you say, our justice system doesn't necessarily lock you up and throw away the key. However, for the last, 20 years, they never thought they would have a shot at getting out, right? Never.
Well, that's why you have this new penal law that allows for cases to be reviewed. So people, I understand. I mean, at some point, the appeals have to stop, like run out of road. Like your issue is just, pardon the pun, like beaten to death. Like it's just like, okay, you've gone through. But then there's this new vehicle. It's like Penal Code is 1172 in California, and in other states it's different. But basically that says, well, wait a minute. There are things that we've learned. What have we learned? Culturally, here's what's changed. We have a new appreciation and understanding for what happens to abuse victims. Yeah. We have an appreciation for the youthful mind, which they say, my son is 18 years old, okay? So I'm in a unique position here. There was not a switch that happened from the 364th day of him being 17 to day 366 where he turns 18. He's a good boy, love him to death, but he is very mature about certain things and lacks a fundamental understanding about the way the world works, and he's still growing, and the mind scientifically is still developing well into your 20s, which is why the Menendez brothers, their case is being asked to be recalled. And there are a lot of reasons. And everybody thinks it's just because abuse didn't come in. But that's not the only reason here. There are other reasons.
And a lot of people are like, well, the judicial system doesn't work off of documentaries. Guys, they're not working off documentaries. There just happens to be a lot of attention surrounding the case because of the documentaries. Because, it does deserve the attention. And look, we are not here to get into certain things like, why didn't they leave? Why did they shoot the mom? Look, I'm not talking about that. We're talking about the facts of the case legally. So just fast forwarding to 2023, when Cliff Gardner, Mark Geragos, they filed the habeas petition. And now the habeas petition did include 2 new pieces of evidence, which would corroborate their rapes, which was the testimony of Roy Roselo, a member of Menudo, who said that Jose raped him in the Menendez home. This seems to really echo what the boy said. Jose felt comfortable in the home. That's where he did these vicious acts. And then it was the letter, obviously, that the boy's cousin, Eric, wrote a letter to Andy Cano in 1989, a few months before the murders, stating that it was still happening. And Robert Rand, the journalist, actually found this letter, I believe in, I don't know, maybe 2016 or something like that, when Andy's mom said, go through his stuff, go ahead. And he found this within an hour, which was pretty incredible. And the letter is telling. I've talked about this letter. The way Eric speaks about his father, it's weird, Jared. It's gross. He says something like, he's so overweight, I can't stand to look at him. That's something you would say about a spouse that you have to be intimate with, not necessarily your parents, right? You'd think like you'd be worried
You know,
about your
these
parents.
guys, so like, and again, those factors like so we have the benefit of hindsight here. We're looking at the Roselo and the Kano letter. Okay. Those are two things that absolutely support this abuse defense. Okay. They're not saying there's no way Jose Menendez was abusing these kids. Eric had reached out not only to Lyall, he reached out to his cousin, and Roselo says, I was molested at that very crime scene. So again, which I would say for 404B, what are the consistencies and the similarities? Young boy in his home, same actor, same MO, like all of that used to get that in. So that's all like on the merits of whether or not the boys were abused. I believe in looking at this, where there's smoke, there's fire. They were abused. What does that mean? Does that mean kill your parents if you're abused? No. That means the level of consequence that they should receive as a result is a little bit different. It's not, it shouldn't be the death penalty for sure. And that factor should be considered by a jury or by a judge when you're being sentenced. First of all, the law recognizes that a youthful mind is prone to possibly recklessness or, flights of fancy. Okay. That alone, add to it repeated abuse and rapes at the hand of a parent. And then Eric Menendez sees an off ramp to college. He's going to be out of the house. And that is closed off. His dad says, no, you have to be home. I have to make sure you're doing the right work, etc. Keeping him there, which is a strange request because Lyall is in New Jersey at Princeton, right? So,
well, we knew what was going on with Eric at that time, and that's why, right? So,
So the big thing though, Lauren, is, and I know a lot of people think the timing of the documentary, full disclosure, I didn't see any of the Menendez documentary. So my knowledge of this case comes right from, I did watch the Zodiac one, which was excellent, but that's for another show. But I look at this, my knowledge of this case comes really from the documents and the court footage that I've seen. And where we are right now is not a result of a documentary. I think it certainly raised public awareness, but we are in a situation where two young men who were 21 years old and 18 years old took the law into their own hands, executed their parents, and are serving life sentences. The thing that is remarkable to me is the lives that Eric and Lyall Menendez have lived while they were incarcerated, never knowing that the key to their jail cell, is those very lives. Like the fact that Eric, and here's what people aren't talking, and they'll say, oh, big deal, he's in jail. Eric Menendez has first of all, he's received several degrees while he's in jail. He has served elderly and handicapped inmates. He's built programs. He's worked with AA groups and N groups, and he has done more behind bars than most people do walking free every day. Okay. That is something that the judge is going to consider in addition to the sexual abuse, in addition to the facts case and whether or not certain things should have happened. There's these post-conviction considerations.
I think you just nailed it. I think you just hit the nail on the head for both brothers, but continue.
Well, and Lyall is an environmentalist, apparently. He set up green spaces in the prison and things like, you say, you're like, here's these two young men. Now they're 56 and Eric is 54. Lyall is 56 years of age. They spent 30 years in jail for a crime they committed. You ever hear that for a crime they didn't commit, for a crime they committed.
Yes.
They have been a positive force. And then you look at their discipline history, right? These guys these are like glamour boys. Like they lived a fancy life. They go to jail. And if you look at their discipline history, and I've had guys, believe me, folks, I've had some bad actors in my career that there's jails that don't want them. I look at the Menendez brothers' history and they're model prisoners. Lyall wouldn't fight back if he was attacked.
Lyall has gotten in 0 fights in 35 years. I just pulled their discipliner, and Eric, one fight in 1997.
Right. When he was very young. And then their violations or cell phones were found in the cells that they're sharing with 4 and 5 other inmates. So whether or not they're their cells, never a drug violation.
Nope.
There was some contact with a female visitor.
His wife,
but the bottom line is, these are two men that have shown not only could they be law abiding in the jail, okay, they can make a positive impact in a hopeless place. And that, to me, if I'm sitting at that as a judge in this case, I look at this, I say, despite the fact that they were abused, everybody wants to talk about the lives they had and all luxury and indulgence that they were afforded. And that stuff's great. But how many people from families like that end up on drugs, dead, losers in life because they're deprived? Jordan Peterson says
they're spoiled.
Well, he says it. Jordan Peterson he says they're deprived the adventure of life, and because they have everything.
Right.
And so there's a psychological component to that. Add to it repeatedly being raped by your own father.
Jesus.
These guys seem to have turned out to be strong gentlemen. I mean, and that's all going to be considered in this resentencing recall.
And Jarrett, just to add to that, the brothers have also run support groups for abuse survivors. And additionally, I came across a Facebook post, and I'm part of Lyall's Facebook group, which is run by a family member, but every once in a while, Lyall can respond himself because he does have some internet access. Mm-hmm. And just to add to this also, if you look at all of Lyall's mugshots, I mean, have you seen a bigger smile in your life? It's just like this guy looks genuinely happy and genuinely at peace. And somebody commented, I wish I could give you peace and I wish I could give you happiness, whatever, something like that. I'm paraphrasing. And Lyall said, I really appreciate that, but I have it already. They have made these lives for themselves in prison. And let's not also forget, aside from where they came from, in the first trial, and it's not just the boys who testified to this, Jose Menendez, his motto in life was lie, cheat, steal, kill, do whatever you have to do, but win. That is not normal. So you grow up in this type of environment, right? I mean, you said it. They could have been drug addicts. They could be getting in fights every day. They were dealt a shitty card despite their privilege. So all of that, in addition to the new evidence, you're correct. And for you as a prosecutor, what you just said was so compelling. I kind of felt like you were a defense attorney for a minute, honestly.
Well, you have to be able to call both sides of the ball here. And I think but the image of the Menendez brothers, if you haven't seen that documentary, are these pastel letters. Here's what people know. And sometimes we give people too much credit. A lot of people don't follow these things. It was the late 1989 into the 90s. They were these two rich boys on the heels of a period of indulgence in the 1980s. The 90s revolted against that. You're a little younger than me if you remember the 90s, but that was grunge, and they didn't like people with money and all that stuff. So the Menendez brothers, in large part, were viewed as spoiled brats in these past sweaters who spent their parents' money in the days and weeks after they killed their parents, and they made up a story that they were molested. That is the image that is burned into the brains of an entire generation that viewed this trial. That's what people are left with. Now, that's a hill to climb to get yourself over, number one, admitting you were wrong about your understanding, or it shakes you a little bit. You're like, boy, I have to take a second look at something I thought I understood. That's what the courts have to do. Like, as a culture evolves and we understand boys can be raped, that's number one. We didn't necessarily grasp that in the 90s, scientifically or culturally, as Mark Geragos said.
Well,
he was interviewed by Megan Pelton, and that's basically what he was saying, and I agree with him.
Can I ask you this, though, and tell me if this is totally off base? And this is, I'm sorry to be so graphic, but the word sodomize, that has always existed, right? Why couldn't they say that instead of the word rape? If you're, you know what I'm saying? Like legally, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I know this. Like,
Yeah.
I've been a part of abuse and rape cases on women, young girls, actually very young girls, and there is a scientific process with a rape kit and things of that nature where you can physically diagnose if someone may have been raped. You don't necessarily get there with boys, or you didn't then, where technology.
Oh, okay.
So that's one part of it.
Okay.
The other part of it is culturally. This was this was a dark family secret people didn't talk about. So, and which is why, as you said, you interviewed a juror. The women understood.
Yeah.
The men were resistant to that abuse. And again, is it because they weren't ready to go there yet? And look, society's been wrong about things, and it takes time to learn these things. Certainly since then we've had the Catholic Church scandals that have come out, and all these different things that have come out in society.
Yeah.
Where were we with regard to gay marriage and things of that nature in the 1990s? If you said that to somebody, they say you're crazy.
Yeah, and let's think about the fact that Lyall on record basically said he was willing to go to prison to not disclose, in order to not disclose this shameful family secret. He was so ashamed. I cannot imagine that. I guess in my brain, I'm thinking, well, why did Leslie Abramson not say, Bazanich, shut your trap. Boys can, of course, be sodomized. What do you mean? I guess I was confused about that.
I just think there was a great unwillingness to acknowledge that this could happen. I think that, our understanding of rape and abuse and just our open-mindedness to, I don't know, there was a sexual revolution in this country at some point, and we became a little bit more open-minded to certainly types of relationships. And the counter to that is there could be abuse on both sides. So
right.
I think, so my point is, as slowly as culture evolves, the law evolves even slower. So, and it takes a while to catch up sometimes. I think the Menendez brothers have, in a sense, fallen victim to that.
Yes. Now let's get to what's happening now. So fast forward, DA Gascon, let's say last month, he says, holds his whole press conference. Everyone's accusing him of doing it for re-election, whatever. I don't care what he's doing it for. I really don't give a crap. So he holds his press conference and he says, I'm going to make a decision about the Menendez brothers, a possible resentencing by, he says, November 26th. He gives this press conference. The Menendez brothers, they ask people to not write letters to the governor. They just say, we appreciate all the support. Everybody hold tight. Well, then the DA announces another press conference, and he says, I'm actually going to make a decision, or this is a I don't know, a news article, and it says that he's expected to make a decision about the Menendez brothers by the end of the week, which is what we saw last week. So, and before that, I just want to add that there was a family press conference held by Geragos where the family got to go over to the DA's office under Marcy's law and speak to the DA about their thoughts as the victims, which is funny that they're referred to as victims because, they're related to Jose and Kitty Menendez. They were their family members, but they want Lyall and Eric out. So it's a very funny dynamic. So that happened. And then, of course, last week we saw the presser where George Gascon recommended that they were resentenced to 50 years to life with immediate parole eligibility. And he was going to recommend that they get parole. So the woman who was in charge of the resentencing division said they were going to file the papers on Friday, October 24th, which they did. And then they expected to have a hearing date set in the next 30 to 45 days based on the fact that the defense and the prosecution were on the same page. So later, I guess it was maybe, what's today, Wednesday, Monday, it was announced by TMZ, Mark Geragos wants to get their conviction overturned where the brothers could essentially be released by the bang of a gavel. This is great news, blah, blah, blah. And then later that night, it was announced by NBC and then eventually across the other networks that Judge William Ryan, who had the motion that was filed at the LA County Courthouse, sent it back over to the Van Nuys Courthouse, which is where their original trials were. And so I think a lot of us were like, wait, so what's going on? Why was it sent there? And then I saw today, which is October 30th, that Geragos did file something with the governor for clemency. So this is where we're at. So if you want to break down what that all means, and then I'll just pull up the October 24th filing really quick, just so we can go through it briefly.
All that stuff, that's a lot of stuff.
Well, no, we don't have to go through all
No,
that.
I will. So let's start with,
sorry.
First of all, the question I keep getting is, why is the DA recommending a sentence of 50 to life? And if that's the case, they have another 20 years on their minimum. The point to be made is they were 21 and 18 at the time these crimes were committed. And in California, if you're younger than 26 years of age and you are sentenced to 25 years plus, at 50% mark, you are of 50% of your minimum, you are entitled to a parole hearing. If the judge, let's say the judge goes with DA Gascon's request and says, okay, Lyall and Eric, you're getting 25 for me, you're getting 25 for Jose, you have 50 to life. They have 30 years in. They get credit for those 30 years. So they've already crossed over their minimum. That triggers a parole hearing. Right. And the parole hearing had with all those things we consider, both judges in the parole board would consider those mitigating factors in their life behind bars.
Right.
So that's why he's asking for 50 to life. However, the judge under this code, which we pulled, has a ton of discretion. He could say, I hear you, Mr. DA, 50 to life sounds fine, but I'm going to go 25 to life and immediately release them. Or I'm going to say, I've looked at this. It's not murder, it's manslaughter. Sentence them to manslaughter, let them go. The judge has broad discretion here. What a judge cannot do under this 1172 is add to the sentence. They can't say, oh, I'm giving you 75 year, something.
Wait,
like that.
But can he, sorry, not to be dumb, but he could also just say, go fly a kite. It is what it is, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he could deny the recall. So it's a recall. Last time there was a recall in California, it was Arnold Schwarzenegger recalled Gray Davis. Remember that? That was a recall.
I don't remember that.
I was reading, it was like, oh God, here's another recall in California. But the big thing here is all of those factors are going to be considered by a judge. Now, simultaneously, Geragos, who's a fantastic lawyer, great, and I've seen him interviewed on this. A lot of what we're saying today, or a lot of what I just listened to his interview with Megyn Kelly, which I thought was great, and he went at our buddy Arthur a little bit. So, but what Geragos is doing, which I think is smart, is he has filed a petition with Governor Gavin Newsom's office to say all of the reasons we have put forth to get to a judge to ask for a resentencing are the same reasons you should consider clemency here. And what does that mean? California, the governor has authority to grant clemency. He can let the Menendez brothers out immediately. He can vacate their sentence. They could be without a hearing. The judge can look at what's pled out and set forth and grant them clemency. So that's a huge. So I guess Geragos says, why not? Why wouldn't I ask at this point with the Roselo and the cousin letter, the things we know now, all of those things. So that what is also happening. That's a new development.
I just made this so ridiculous. Sorry. I was trying to add to the stage and I completely took you out. So okay. So that's interesting. I guess I was confused because I was thinking to myself, well, why wouldn't you have asked for clemency with the habeas petition? But I guess it makes sense if the DA has now officially made a recommendation. Now he feels confident enough to come forward and say, with all of this evidence and this recommendation and their records, their exemplary records, why not clemency?
Yes, and I think
Okay.
you can bet. Now, we don't have the clemency application because it's not filed with like a prothonotary. It's actually a private document. I was on a board of pardons and parole here in the state of Pennsylvania, and they're not filed of record. They're forwarded into the office and then distributed to who they need to go to. So we may not see those officially if they don't let them out, but you can bet the recall motion by Gascon's office is exhibit number on the clemency application. So to say we're standing with Geragos is saying the DA standing with me. I mean, what better? And for a clemency petition, that is a huge thing to consider.
And something else that I think it's important to note, because a reporter asked this at the press conference, is what if Tuesday, November 5th, Gascon doesn't get reelected? Well, his opponent and Hochman, that he cannot recall this. Once it's filed, and he cannot rescind on that. Right?
Who said that?
Gascon said that.
Yeah, well, I would think you're going to have a tough time doing it. Because you're essentially bound. You can't let a political change make a material change necessarily in a case. I don't know. That might be a fight they have to have, because if that hearing isn't held prior to, because I mean, Gascon doesn't walk out the next day. I mean, he's there till January, I think. I would imagine they may get to it before then. I think it would be awful if, but there is some talk. And I know that Uncle Milton is backing his attorney is backing his opponent.
Yeah, I saw that on Megan
Kelly. The lone holdout from the family that's not supporting Eric and Lyall Menendez being released. So I don't want to necessarily speculate, but there is some good authority that says you're bound by the positions and certain steps taken by the prior DA. On a recall petition, it's kind of new, it's kind of evolving, but I think the law is going to favor. Show me what part of that's not true. Like everything that Gascon has said.
And I'm not a fan of his. I mean, I'm definitely not, but I really appreciate everything that he is doing and has done for this case, because I do think it's important. And Geragos, whether or not this is true, this is not coming from me directly, but Geragos essentially outed Uncle Milton as an abuser himself, allegedly. So I thought that was an interesting,
pretty nasty.
It was nasty. And I remember Megan Kelly's like, well, he's not here to defend himself. So it's, it is what it is. But I thought that was an interesting point that he brought up. So now I am I'm just going to open this up for a second. If there was anything that stuck out to you, Jared, I don't know if you can remember.
Yes, so go to page 12.
Okay, page 12.
So this is the what we always got to boil down is, what is the judge looking at? All the language of it. So the judge is one thing you learn about in law. There's always these balancing tests. Okay. So in the interest of justice, the judge can look at anything they would have normally considered when you're sentencing a defendant. Their prior history, the nature of the crime, all of their post-conviction conduct, the law, anything that's developed since then on the merits of the case. That's number one. But what is it balanced against? What's the counter argument here? I mean, clearly you and I are in support of this being discussed. On the next if you go to, so 12 is basically allowing them to consider anything that's typical.
Right. Okay.
On to 12, it basically has to, the language is, and I'm looking at the document here.
Yep. They cite the People versus Pillsbury on 13.
So they're saying, it's balanced against, can't go, must give credit. Let me just say. Hold on. No. It's page 12. I'm sorry. So the discretion is this. All those things I just listed versus the likelihood that this person will reoffend or their risk of danger to the community. So when you ask the question of whether or not the Menendez brothers should be granted a resentence under this petition, it's all the good stuff you and I said versus one thing and one thing only: Lyall and Eric Menendez's likelihood to recommit a violent felony, period.
Right.
That's the conversation. It begins and ends there. Do you think Lyall and Eric Menendez are going to go on a crime spree when they get out of jail? Do you think they are likely to reoffend? If the answer is no, then
yeah,
they're going to get some good news very soon.
I tend to agree with that. And I can add this, the document to the episode notes so everybody can take a look, but it really is just mind-blowing here. Like you said, I'm so glad you pointed everything out, what they've been able to accomplish while they were in prison. And just the simple fact that I don't know if I could not get in a fight. You know what I mean? Like, how do you not get in a fight for 35 years?
I think you'd have some in prison.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. No, you're right. I would not last a day, but I'm just saying it's so crazy to think about that their life was essentially to a certain degree almost better in prison. And that's a loaded statement, I guess, but if you've watched some of their interviews and you've I guess paid attention, you'll know that there was some kind of freedom that they were granted in prison, just being away from their parents, and they regret it. They regret their actions. They have said it a number of times. I remember specifically on Larry King. He did an interview with his wife. Eric did an interview with his wife in the early 2000s. He immensely regrets killing his parents. It's not like he's like, well, I killed them. What's done is done. And at least we're free. He literally, I mean.
And that's another factor too, by the way, remorse.
Yes.
And I mean, all of that stuff together, I think Geragos wants them, at Thanksgiving dinner with him. That a little ambitious considering it's October 30th. But,
totally.
Having an appreciation for the law that's in play here, really it comes down to, it's all about mitigation, and is this in the interest of justice to keep them there? And folks that say killed their parents, they should rot in there for the rest of their lives. Look, some cases aren't life sentences. Some cases aren't capital cases. I've made that decision dozens and dozens of times. Not all murder is the same. Sorry, it's just not. And that's the way it is.
Yeah. And I think that the people who may argue that it's just high profile and maybe it's unfair, I mean, guys, it's been 35 years. So I wasn't personally talking about this for the last 20 years. I wasn't. I just wasn't. And then for the people that also say, well, they were making it up. I've said it a number of times. How can you stick with the same lie for 35 years, especially the fact that the brothers were separated for so long? For 21 years, they did not see each other. They did not communicate. Eric could have easily blamed this on Lyall to possibly get himself out, and vice versa. Never happened. It never happened. Someone's going to break if it's a lie. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. And look, we'll never know, but in looking at this, there's smoke there. I mean, there's smoke there. First of all, you have the manner in which these were killed. You have the strange behavior. You have telling other people during this. You have Jose acting out on Roselo. I mean, these are all, it's there. And I think it's there. When I say it's there, it's something that everybody should consider in disposing of the case. Do I think it could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt? I don't know. I mean, that's not for me to say, but there's a lot there. There's a lot there.
Agreed. And you bring up a great point about Oziel. I mean, it's like that whole thing. And honestly, Eric, he could not take it. He was about to kill himself if he did not tell somebody. And in my eyes, personally, that's not this. I don't know what they did was brutal. It was savage. It's unspeakable. However, what Jose did to them and Matt, I mean, I'm a mother. My son's 6. God, imagine a mother allowing that knowingly. That's that's unspeakable in itself. So I just, it's a really hard thing to grasp, and it's a really tough conversation, and it's really hard for these news networks to have these people on and say their piece, and I guess talk about the case in these 5-minute hits. This is not a 5-minute conversation, right? It's so tough. It's like, how do you explain all the different nuances in a short segment A? You can't.
No,
It's
you
not
can't.
as
And
simple.
it's brutal. And you and I do these shows. It's tough. Like, you never feel like you get to say what is really happening. And really, you're confined to the question you're asked. I mean, you don't get to
Of
develop
course.
these things.
Yeah.
As I said, and you don't get to appreciate the nuance and the law that's actually being considered here.
Right. Yeah. So I think, with all of these things, I hope and I do pray that they get out. I'm just going to say it. I think they should be freed. I think that, they've served their time, and I've got this friend that he has a great podcast, Boston Confidential. We always spar on Twitter, like in a friendly way, but he just says, "Oh, if what happened, I'll post about the Menendez brothers," and he'll say, "Well, what happens if they want another Rolex?" He'll say things like that, and you're like, "All right," and then he'll, I'm saying free them, and he's like, "Well, will they get their shotguns back?" And you're just like, see, this is when it's like, you got to look into the case a bit further. You got to dig deeper than the headlines.
But Lauren, take the abuse out of it. Take the abuse out of it. Let's say that was not a factor here. You have another component of the law, as we discussed. They were young boys when this happened. And then you look at their lives in jail. Are these people that belong in jail for the rest of their lives based on the lives they've lived after the fact? And believe me, I've tried 17-year-olds for murder. I've sent very young people to jail for the rest of their lives. And I believed that I was doing it. But then I've had young people that have resolved the cases, because despite the fact that you're busy, you're not too busy to consider on a case-by-case basis what makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's easy to lock the door and throw away the key on the Menendez brothers.
Of course.
But you would be ignoring, take abuse out of it, you would be ignoring the marked improvements and lives they've lived, and the science that's come out about the development of the young mind.
Well, and going back to just the fact that they didn't get a fair second trial. And I think that that's what makes the United States such an amazing place to live is, the justice system is not perfect at all, but everyone's entitled to a fair trial. And I feel like they just didn't get one. And listen, I'm not sitting here and talk to me if someone hurts my family or whatever, if I'm going to sit here and say the defendants deserve a fair trial. You know what I mean? Like, I get that. I completely understand how that can sound if you're not in the situation. I'm talking about this situation specifically. So
if you're a victim, but here's the thing, if you're a victim, you better hope a defendant gets a fair trial if you want them to stay in jail. So
there you go. Yeah.
You have, those aren't easy conversations to have with people, but
absolutely. And
everybody, what does Mike Tyson say? Everybody's a tough guy till they get punched in the face. It's like, come into that world as a victim, prosecutor, defense lawyer. And I've, as many good guys as I've known as many bad, and I've seen, and people, life is not simple. Life is complicated. We need a system that's fair and that could appreciate all aspects of it.
Right. Well, I was going to say, just to close things out, I would love to hear your final thoughts on where you see this going. Geragos did file for clemency today. You saw the 24th, the DA filed his recommendation, and it went to the Van Nuys courthouse, a different judge than Judge Ryan. What do you see happening?
Well, I don't know why that happened. And I know we tried to figure that out. I don't know. Apparently there's a conflict or something somewhere that judge sent it to Van Nuys. I don't know. But what do I see happening? Watch our interview with Ana Garcia. I said it. It's high time for a deal to be cut. These guys there should be a plea. These guys are going to be either resentenced or granted clemency. The Menendez brothers will be coming home.
You think it's imminent? They will be coming home?
Yes.
I hope so. I hope so. And I can see I follow a lot of their family members, and I can see that they're really they're treading lightly. They're trying not to get their hopes up. They're cautiously optimistic without, I guess, saying so. So yeah, I mean, this was a great conversation. I feel like I learned so much, and I hope that our viewers and our listeners did as well. A couple of housekeeping things, guys, and we would love for you all to weigh in on this. Jarrett and I are considering doing pop-up lives, maybe not going live every single Wednesday night, but doing a weekly show regardless, and then adding some lives in here and there. There seems to be a lot going on Wednesday nights now, and it's, we want everyone to watch their favorite YouTubers, their favorite legal experts and analysts, without, I guess, being or feeling like there's just too much going on. So weigh in, let us know your thoughts in the chat. We would love to hear them. So we will keep you posted on our schedule if it updates. You can follow me on Twitter at Conlon_Lauren, or you can follow Jarrett at Ferentino ESQ on Twitter.
Who only retweets Lauren's posts.
Only retweets me, yeah.
Well, I'm very busy, as you can see here. So
Stop. Okay, well, thank